Operation Barbarossa nearly crippled the Soviets, but they never expected to face women in wood and canvas biplanes in the dead of night. The creation of one female pilot, a squadron of night witches, becoming the most terrifying pilots of the war. But how did they do it? And why were the night witch missions so terrifying? After the Wehrmacht captured most of the West, driving deep into France and the rest of Europe, Hitler and his generals set their sights on Moscow. After days of bombing raids, casualties mounted, with the Luftwaffe destroying more than 3,000 Soviet aircraft in the first 3 days. Gender roles in Moscow quickly went out the door, and as the Germans continued marching east, they encountered battalions of female tank crews, infantry, and snipers. Known as the Red Army women, these soldiers played a pivotal role in stemming the German advance. But with so many strikes on airfields, the Soviets were running out of crew. Yet despite the large pool of available female pilots, none were ever considered for the Air Force, often being deployed to hold the front lines. Meanwhile, one woman, Marina Raskova, was already an accomplished aviator in the Soviet Union. She'd excel through ranks even before the war, becoming the first female navigator in the Soviet Air Force by 1933. She also became the catalyst that set the stage for female pilots to enter service and give the Germans something to fear at night. As Operation Barbarossa kicked off, Raskova realized that women could play a vital role in stopping German advances. With hundreds of trained pilots, through local flying schools, even before the war, she leveraged her contact with Joseph Stalin, calling for a change to the policy and to cut the red tape preventing women from joining the Air Force. Thousands of letters flooded her desk, all women offering their services and asking how they could use their skills to help defend the Soviet Union. Finally, she was granted authority, being handed the 122nd Composite Air Group. Immediately, hundreds of women enlisted, so much so that the 122nd Composite Air Group split into 3 all-female regiments, namely the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment and the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment. But most important of them all was the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, later earning the nickname Night Witches by the German soldiers. Many of these women, in their late teens or early 20s, were given just a few months of training, learning the basics, but no one knew how important that would become. In fact, they flew more than 23,600 sorties, dropping over 3,000 tons of bombs, with another 26,000 incendiary shells, stopping German advances in their tracks. And all of this was done with nothing more than Polikarpov U-2 biplanes, essentially a crop duster used for farming. The U-2 LNB version was a little more advanced, designed specifically for nighttime sorties, but nothing compared to the quality of aircraft used by the Luftwaffe, especially the Messerschmitt Bf 109. Yet these aircraft had one secret weapon. Created in the mid-1920s, the Polikarpov U-2 was a training aircraft, used as a crop duster during peacetime. It was made from canvas, wood, and wire that held it all together, with room for 2 crew members. One was the pilot, and the other the bombardier, responsible for precision strikes on German positions. Its flight ceiling was barely 10,000 feet, and its top speed was just 94 miles per hour. This was even lower when strapped with a few pounds of bombs. As the pilots came in for bombing raids, cruising speed was triggered, only allowing the plane to go around 70 miles per hour, making them some of the slowest to be used in combat during World War II. In fact, the plane was so bad that many soldiers called it a wooden coffin with wings, and just one hit from enemy fire often led to the Polikarpov U-2 bursting out in flames mid-air. What's more, the female pilots didn't receive parachutes until 1944, which meant that one hit was fatal for those on board. Adding to the fear was the fact that there were no radios, just the night sky and hope that your squadron would back you up. A lack of maintenance meant that each flight was a gamble. It was essentially like playing Russian roulette each time a pilot stepped into the cockpit. But these fearless women wanted to save the Soviet Union, and despite all the risks, they'd go on to strike fear into the hearts of German soldiers. The Polikarpov U-2 was fraught with issues that made it arguably the worst aircraft of the Second World War. Yet, it managed to turn its biggest weakness into a massive advantage on the battlefield. Since it didn't require a massive runway, just an open field was enough to get it in the air. This meant that the P-2 could be stationed right on the front lines and take off without any restrictions. It also had a maximum speed that was significantly slower than the stalling speed of more advanced fighters. They had a soft whistling sound, often associated with a witch flying on a broom. That was the only warning the Germans got. And at some point, it became such a psychological problem that the Germans didn't want to sleep, fearing the next Night Witch raid. Essentially, they were incredibly hard to shoot down, aside from Luftwaffe ace pilot Josef Kochok, who managed to shoot down 4 planes in one night, downing the entire regiment for 2 days. Nevertheless, these women came up with a surprising set of tactics. In traditional battle tactics, the most logical approach for bombers would be to fly as fast as possible to the target, deliver the ordnance, and then get out. But this wasn't possible for the old P-2, so the women came up with a new plan. They flew low over the treetops in groups of 3, barely clearing them. Once they were close enough to be heard by the enemy, they quickly split up. Each pilot bolted in a different direction. Following a loop around, the P-2s returned from 3 directions, essentially confusing ground forces before engaging the target. To make it even harder for the Germans to track their flight paths, the women turned off their engines mid-flight, gliding in over the target before dropping the bombs. Once the ordnance fell, the engine was turned back on before speeding away, although calling it speed might not be the best word. One problem was that each of these biplanes could only carry 2 bombs, meaning that the damage wasn't necessarily terrifying. But these Night Witches made up for it by flying up to 18 missions each per night. As each squadron of 3 planes landed, 3 more took off, targeting the same area, essentially raining down repeated bombs and preventing the Germans from getting any rest at night. During the day, these women would sleep, before the nights turned from dark to light with thousands of bombs dropping on German positions. The Germans became so bewildered that one Soviet pilot, Nadia Popova, said that Wehrmacht soldiers were so confused by the efficiency of these crop dusters, they spread rumors suggesting that pilots were injected with unknown chemicals that made it possible for them to see at night. Obviously, this wasn't true, but all played into the narrative of them being witches with special skills that could do the unthinkable. But exactly how effective were these women? Over the course of the war, the Night Witches carried out 23,672 sorties, totaling a whopping 28,676 flight hours. With 2,920 during the Battle of the Caucasus, more than 4,600 in Kuban, Taman, and Novorossiysk. 6,140 sorties during the Crimean Offensive, 400 in Belarus, 5,421 in Poland, and 2,000 during the German Offensive. They'd go on to destroy 9 railways and 2 railway stations, preventing the Germans from getting supplies to the front lines. 17 river crossings were damaged or destroyed, with 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 86 firing points, 11 searchlights, and a massive 176 armored cars being crippled during the repeated raids. And all this damage was done by just 261 pilots, losing only 32 pilots due to combat or tuberculosis. 23 of these female pilots received the most prestigious award in the Soviet Union at the time, being honored with the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, the woman responsible for all this wouldn't see the result of her creation, when on January 4, 1943, following a sortie, Marina Raskova attempted to land her P-2 on the Volga bank. She, alongside her team of 2 more pilots and 3 bombardiers, all lost their lives in a horrific crash. She would later be recognized as a hero of the Soviet Union, also receiving the first state funeral of the war. Her final resting place would be in Red Square, where her ashes were buried in the Kremlin. Unfortunately, the Night Witches came to a screeching halt following World War II. By the time Berlin fell and Germany surrendered, the Soviets had all but forgotten about the Night Witches. They were officially disbanded in October 1945, with their service members demobilized. The Soviets again excluded women from military roles, leaving them back home to occupy their roles of childbearing. Adding to the irony is the fact that they weren't even allowed to participate in the Moscow Victory Day parade. According to military top brass, the Polikarpov U-2 was deemed too slow to keep up with other aircraft during the parade. Over time, the Night Witches and their heroic accomplishments faded from memory, with only a handful of women continuing to tell their tale post-war. Yet their impact on the war could never be forgotten, and had it not been for the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, who knows whether the Soviets would have managed to keep Stalingrad, the ultimate turning point of the German invasion on the Eastern Front. These weren't just heroes, but women of impeccable skill, who became heroes. But if you want to see a real hero in action, make sure to check out the next video to find out how Officer Woody Williams became an American hero during World War II with nothing but a flamethrower.